Welcome back to What If Skylanders Were in Smash. Today we're talking about the erratic, gun-toting gremlin himself, Trigger Happy. Along with Spyro and Gill Grunt, he is one of the 3 Skylanders to be included with the starter pack of the first Skylanders game, Spyro's Adventure. A Skylander of the tech element, Trigger Happy fights his enemies by firing gold coins from his 2 pistols. His other abilities include lobbing gold safes or pots at enemies, and a machine gun that fires gold coins as well. Now, as you can probably tell, Trigger Happy is mainly a projectile-based fighter, which isn't uncommon in Smash. Notable examples include Samus, Snake, Mega Man, and Mii Gunner. However, the difference between them and Trigger Happy is that he never physically attacks his enemies, as far as I know. He doesn't punch, or kick, or even use his guns to bash enemies. Another thing to note is that Trigger Happy is much smaller in size than most typical fighters, or Skylanders for that matter. And as you can also see from his appearance, he is significantly lacking when it comes to his appendages, especially his tiny little stumpy legs. As such, creating a moveset for him was more complicated than I thought. So complicated in fact that I ended up creating 2 possible sets of basic moves for him. I did say before that I was going to lay out everything, so here it is. But before we start, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. So the first set of basic moves is going to focus solely on projectiles, meaning every smash attack, tilt, aerial, and throw are mostly going to involve Trigger Happy shooting his guns in some way. And the other set is going to focus on primarily physical attacks that Trigger Happy could potentially use and are most certainly going to be inspired by other fighters. We'll call these movesets Guns and Melee, respectively. First up is his neutral attack, which is the same for both sets of basic moves, mainly because I don't have any other suggestions. But personally, I don't think any is needed here. It would functionally be the same as Mega Man's neutral attack, where Trigger Happy shoots up to 3 coins, which have long range but deal little damage. In addition, these coins could also ricochet off walls or other surfaces. Up next are the smash attacks, starting with forward smash. For a long time, the only concept I had was that Trigger Happy charges up his guns and fires a bigger, more powerful coin, similar to Mega Man's forward smash. And I really didn't want to use that for something we'll get into in a minute. But at the time, I didn't have any other ideas, until I looked at the 5th Skylanders game, Superchargers. Now, upon the release of the 5th game, along with the titular Superchargers, there were also Supercharger counterparts of old Skylanders like Gill Grunt, Stealth Elf, and of course, Trigger Happy. But the main difference between his other variants and this one is that the Supercharger variant had their own unique moveset. Not completely original, but definitely quite a few new abilities. As such, it's possible that these counterparts could be their own separate fighter in Skylander Smash, but personally, I don't believe that these variants should be counted as Smash fighters, or at the very least, most of them. For one, most of these Supercharger counterparts don't really differ that much apart from their costume. For example, Double Dare Trigger Happy still uses 2 guns, and Hurricane Jetpack still uses a vacuum. And sure, there are plenty of examples of different versions of the same fighter in Smash, like Link, Young Link, and Toon Link, Samus and Zero Suit Samus, or pretty much every Echo Fighter, but at least the Links and Echo Fighters were separate characters, and Zero Suit Samus's moveset is very different from Samus's. Essentially, the only difference between the original and Supercharger version is the appearance and choice of weaponry. So in my opinion, they shouldn't be counted as Smash fighters, but that doesn't mean their abilities should be ignored. Therefore, some of these Superchargers' abilities will be integrated into their original version in some capacity, and that is certainly the case for Trigger Happy. Going back to the move, if we take a look at Double Dare Trigger Happy, one of his moves is shooting a ring of fire from his guns. Trigger Happy wouldn't shoot a ring per se, but in general he would shoot out a burst of flames from his gun. Let's move on to Up Smash, where we'll reference Double Dare yet again. Another facet of Double Dare is his ability to shoot pyrotechnics around himself, or in other words, he attacks with fireworks. I know one Smash fighter who also uses fireworks. For both movesets, Trigger Happy releases an explosion of fireworks above him for his up smash. Lastly, we have the down smash. Now this is where the move is different for both sets. For guns, Trigger Happy would shoot out bursts of flames in front of and behind him. He can either shoot in front of him then back, like Mii Gunner, or at the same time, like Mega Man. As for melee, Trigger Happy performs a sort of spin attack, physically hitting enemies with his guns. It's basically Kirby's down smash, but with guns instead of his feet. Now let's move on to the tilts, starting with the forward tilt. First off, for guns, at first I thought Mega Man's, which is essentially a copy of his neutral attack, but then I thought of someone better. Instead, Trigger Happy would emulate Mii Gunner's, where he releases a short-range burst of fire, again referencing superchargers. As for melee, Trigger Happy would perform a pistol whip, or more generally, use one of his guns as a battering weapon. I think this is the first move that is completely original and not taken from the Smash Bros. Or Skylanders games. Moving on, we have the up tilt. For guns, we're again mimicking Mii Gunner's, where Trigger Happy uppercuts with his gun, shooting a fiery blast from it. For melee, I have two ideas. He can jump up to headbutt fighters, like how Squirtle does it, or he can do what's called a scorpion kick, where he swings one of his legs upwards behind himself, though I don't think his leg is big enough to deal damage that way. Finally, there's the down tilt. For guns, pretty much the same as the other tilts. Trigger Happy fires a burst of flames towards the ground, and for melee, Trigger Happy would sweep the ground, except he uses his gun to hit foes instead of his leg like most fighters. Up next is the dash attack, which I don't have one for guns, so we're focusing on melee only. Trigger Happy can either perform a roll, dealing damage with his whole body, or he can perform a drop kick, similar to how Squirtle does it. I should also briefly mention Trigger Happy's speed, which is probably pretty normal, similar to Kirby's. We are now on to aerials. First up is the Nair. For guns, all I could think of is Mega Man's, which is the same as his neutral attack and forward tilt. For melee though, Trigger Happy could perform a cartwheel attack, similar to Kirby or Villager or Squirtle, etc. He could also swing his guns in a circular motion to hit fighters. Forward air is up next. For guns, I thought of Mii Gunner's, where they would simply fire a projectile. In Trigger Happy's case, he would fire a slightly bigger, more powerful coin. For melee, he can perform a drop kick similar to Squirtle, or he can swing his guns downwards to strike his opponents. Back air is basically the same situation. Mii Gunner for guns, Squirtle for melee. More specifically, Trigger Happy can either fire a burst of flames behind him with his guns, or he can do a sort of backwards corkscrew, or another dropkick, just to be lazy. Let's move on to down air. For guns, Trigger Happy would either mirror Mega Man's, where just like his forward air, he fires a more powerful coin just downwards, or he just simply mirrors Mii Gunner's, where he shoots a burst of flames downwards. For melee, the only thing I thought of is a drill kick, where Trigger Happy spins his body, hitting multiple times with his feet. And lastly, there's up air, which was probably the hardest move to think up for Trigger Happy. For guns, I thought he could take from Double Dare again, and shoot a ring of fire upwards. And for melee, Trigger Happy swings his guns again, except upwards. And for the last of the basic attacks, we have the grab and throws. For Trigger Happy, obviously he would use his hands to grab his foes, despite holding two guns. And for his pummel, he could either headbutt or pistol whip them. Moving on to forward throw, for guns, he would blast his opponent away with his gun. And for melee, he would somersault forward and slam them like Kirby, or dropkick them like Squirtle. Then we have the back throw. For guns, Trigger Happy would toss his foe backward and then fire shots at them, similar to Mii Gunner or Fox. And for melee, same thing with Kirby and Squirtle, Trigger Happy would either slam them backward or lift them up and then toss them. Up throw for guns, basically the same thing as back throw. Throw them up, then shoot. And for melee, same as Squirtle, throw them upward and then headbutt them. Finally, there's the down throw. For guns, I'm thinking Fox's, where he slams his opponent on the ground and fires shots at them. In the case of Trigger Happy, I'm picturing him standing on his enemy's body while he shoots them. And lastly for melee, let's go back to our two favorite short kings. Trigger Happy can either sit on them like Squirtle, or rapidly kick them on the ground like Kirby. Last, but probably least, we have the edge attack. Nothing special, Trigger Happy just swings his gun on the stage to attack. And we are finally done with the basic moves. And more importantly, this 2 moveset bullshit. Speaking of, I think the optimal set of basic moves for Trigger Happy is a mix of the 2. A combination of both gun and melee attacks. Now we can finally move on to something much less tedious, the special moves and Final Smash. Starting with the neutral special. Now the reason why I was so opposed to the Mega Man forward smash for Trigger Happy is that this move is basically the same thing, but better. More specifically, I'm referring to Trigger Happy's Golden Supercharge, where he can charge up his gun to fire a more powerful bullet. But more importantly, this move can be upgraded to perform Trigger Happy's most powerful move, the Golden Yamato Blast. Now it can be argued that this move should be the Final Smash, but I think it's better suited to be a special move due to there existing numerous neutral specials in Smash that deal immense damage. Example that comes to mind is Roy/Crom's neutral special, which has the potential to instantly KO an opponent at 0% damage. You know what they say, with great power comes an incredibly long charge time, which is the case for both Roy/Crom and Trigger Happy. In Skylanders, it takes a long time for Trigger Happy to charge up the Golden Yamato Blast, and the same applies for him in Smash. Additionally, if the move is interrupted at any point, it immediately cancels. So theoretically, this move would be incredibly hard to land in a typical match, but once it does... Some other things to note. For one, I'm not 100% sure if this move should insta-kill fighters at 0 damage, but it should do at least 50% damage. This move should also have one of those special zooms, a feature usually present in most high damage or knockback specials. Secondly, Trigger Happy can also move while charging his gun, but at a reduced speed, and once fully charged, the blast knocks him back a small distance. That's everything for the neutral. Let's move on to the side special, which is his ability to lob golden safes and pots at enemies. The move is basically Trigger Happy throwing these safes or pots at an arc, incredibly similar to Simon and Richter's neutral special, where they throw axes in the same way. Only difference is that in Skylanders, the safes/pots break apart once they hit an enemy or surface, while Simon and Richter's axe is able to break the laws of physics and pierce through fighters and solid ground. I'm a little conflicted because it makes sense if the safes/pots break on impact, but on the other hand, if axes can phase through solid ground, why can't they? There's also this upgrade where Trigger Happy throws a giant gold coin, which deals even more damage if it lands on heads. But personally, I don't think this move is suitable because Smash is a 2D game, so the aesthetic wouldn't really work with this. Lastly, besides appearance, the only difference between the safes and pots is that the pots dealt more damage in the original games. So in my opinion, it doesn't matter which one he throws in Smash, he can probably throw both, honestly. Let's move on to the up special. And this is one of those rare instances where we're not imitating another Smash fighter's recovery. For this move, we're going back to Double Dare Trigger Happy, where one of his abilities is him shooting himself out of a cannon. Alternatively, he can launch himself out of a golden pot instead if he wanted to be faithful to the original design. So basically, his up special would be exactly that. The move starts by being aimed upwards and can be tilted in any horizontal direction, and the more the move is held, the farther he travels, and the more damage he deals. All in all, this move serves as both a recovery and an offensive move. And side note, if you think it's ludicrous that Trigger Happy can summon a cannon out of thin air, just know that Wario can pull a motorcycle out of his ass whenever he wants. Finally, we've come to the down special, which is Trigger Happy's Golden Machine Gun. Now this gun fires gold coins at an exceedingly high rate, which gives it the potential of being a massive damage dealer. But one thing I want to note is that in Smash, this gun shouldn't have the ability to cause characters to flinch. Now flinching just means that a character gets interrupted and briefly stunned by an attack, which may not seem like a big deal on the surface, but if for instance, every gold coin fired by the machine gun had the ability to flinch, the enemy fighter would basically be trapped, which would make this ability very broken, especially if the gun has long range. So instead, I'm proposing that this move be more like Fox's neutral special, where he fires his blaster. Sure, it's unable to stun fighters, but it functions more so as a damage dealer to set up potential KOs. There's also an upgrade for the machine gun where Trigger Happy can fire a giant blast, similar to the Golden Yamato Blast, from the machine gun. But in my opinion, I think this is way too extra and makes Trigger Happy a wee bit overpowered. So I'm shoving that idea for now. And for the last item on the moveset, we have the Final Smash. Now for this one, we're looking at one of Trigger Happy's Wow Pows, which are extra abilities given to older Skylanders in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th games. In particular, we're looking at Trigger Happy's Wow Pow from the 3rd game, which is his Rocket Ride ability. Honestly, the ability is pretty underwhelming in the original games, but fortunately, its use in Smash is going to be much more extravagant. The whole move in Smash is basically a combination of both Olimar's and Diddy Kong's Final Smash. Once activated, Trigger Happy will mount a giant golden rocket, and then proceed to fly all around the stage in multiple directions, similar to the beginning of Diddy Kong's Final Smash. However, I would say Trigger Happy is less all over the place than Diddy Kong with its flying, instead flying at a much slower pace all over the screen. But to compromise, Trigger Happy does more damage than Diddy Kong when he flies into other fighters, so much so that he has the potential to KO them in this state. And right after the flying is done, is where Olimar's Final Smash kicks in. Trigger Happy then flies upwards off screen, and after a while, his rocket will crash down on the stage, releasing a massive explosion. Where he crashes will always be the location where he initiated the Final Smash. However, in this stage, the rocket's trajectory can be shifted either left or right by the player. As an added detail, the rocket's eventual blast zone is presented as a shadow growing bigger and bigger on the stage, so that the player can more easily tell where the rocket will crash. And with that, we are done with all Trigger Happy's moves. On to the cosmetics. To start, his introduction is very simple and on brand with him. First, a gold pot appears on the stage, and then Trigger Happy pops out of it along with his 2 golden guns. Simple as that. Next, let's cover the taunts. The first is a gun-spitting taunt, like how he does it in his trailer. Second, since Trigger Happy is a very manic character, he would have a taunt of him laughing, like some Smash fighters. And lastly, a taunt similar to Inkling's side taunt, where he would fire one of his guns in the air. Next, let's briefly go over the crowd cheer, which is just a generic 4-syllable cheer of the name Trigger Happy. As a bonus, at the end it could even have that cliche rhythmic 5 claps. Trigger Happy! Let's move on to the victory poses. The first pose references his trailer, where he fires multiple shots in the air until he fires at the camera. The second pose starts with the camera filming a golden pot. Then it starts to rattle until finally Trigger Happy pops out and poses in the air. And the last pose is just Trigger Happy continuously firing his machine gun while laughing, even after the freeze frame. And last but not least, we've come to Trigger Happy's alternate costumes. Contrary to the last video, all of these costumes are purely going to be inspired by the Skylanders games, which will most certainly continue to be the norm for this series. The first costume is Legendary Trigger Happy, which, just like Legendary Spyro in my last video, is just a navy blue and gold recolor. Next is an Easter themed variant called Springtime Trigger Happy, which is just a pastel purple recolor. To some extent, the purple color could also reference Spyro, who is best friends with Trigger Happy, and obviously he's included with him in the Spyro's Adventure starter pack. And next we have a counterpart called High Noon Trigger Happy, which is just a Western themed variant, with Trigger Happy wearing a cowboy hat and gun belt. This is apparently from Skylanders Battlecast, a card mobile game. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention Double Dare Trigger Happy, seeing as we've talked about him countless times already. There is also a recolor of that skin called Power Blue Trigger Happy, but I'm taking this costume out of consideration, because apparently this skin was made to highlight the partnership between Activision, Skylanders publisher, and the foundation Autism Speaks. And that is a can of worms I do not want to get into. That's not what this channel is about. For those of you who are curious, you can do your own research. That is all the official skins for Trigger Happy, so the last 3 are just going to be recolors referencing details from the original games. First is a blue variant, referencing another fellow Skylander, Pop Fizz, a magic Skylander who was introduced in the second game, and like Trigger Happy, is also a gremlin. And of course, it could also reference Gill Grunt, who was also included in the aforementioned starter pack. Next is a light blue / teal recolor, referencing a very obscure enemy, Boom Fiends, gremlins who carry bombs and try to self-destruct near the player. And for our last costume, we have a black / gray recolor, referencing this image I found. According to the wiki, it's an image taken from the TV show Skylanders Academy. At last, we are done with Trigger Happy. That was a lot more fun. While it was a lot more complex to create, I'm a lot more proud of this video based on how much detail I added. And I hope all of you enjoyed watching. Again, please leave all of your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. Next week's video is going to be about Gill Grunt, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you amazing people soon. Boop!